Jerry, this is your first. It was your first feature. How did you come to want to make film when you had been a very successful photographer in every field, portrait, fashion, etc.?
I guess everybody wants to make film, you know, and even while I was doing stills, and actually when I started doing stills is really when I started to have an education in film, because I would, before that, I didn't know, and I was never a huge cineast, but I loved movies. And I started doing footage, and I have footage that I've never put together, never shown. And every once in a while I take it out and I say, well, maybe I'll put this together. But I was working with a camera. I had been shooting stuff on 16 millimeter. But this was a story that impressed me, and I kept thinking, how can I tell this story? And I tried to think maybe I can tell it with stills with her. It's a story about a friend of mine who I saw had a breakdown, who I saw lost her money, who I saw was in, you know, very deep straits, and I noticed there were other women in the same business because their careers are finished when they're very young, and they don't know what to do because they're given so much. So I said, and then one day I said, well, maybe I can make a film, you know, and I didn't know very much about films, and I had done 1 or 2 commercials, and I was doing commercials, but I didn't like doing commercials.
Why?
There were too many people telling me what I couldn't do, you know, so every time I try to do something, they said, no, we can't do that, and the legal department won't let that, and, you know, so it was just not very pleasant doing. It was on film, but it wasn't really film. It wasn't something exciting. And it's almost a lot like my stills, because I've always said to myself that if I didn't go the way of a fashion photographer by accident, I might have found documentary photography, still photography. I might have been a reportage, because I enjoy telling stories with stills, but this particular story I didn't think could be done with stills. And one day, some producers from LA called me and asked me if I'd be interested in being technical supervisor on a TV special, The World's Most Beautiful Woman, which was connected with what I do. And I said, oh, yes, it'd be very nice. And when they came to New York, I showed them this footage that I had been doing. I said, who's the director? And they said, they don't have a director yet. And when I showed them the footage, they said, well, okay, we'll show it to the network. They did, and the network said, okay. So I was now the director and the technical advisor. And we went to London to do the first, and it was not just cosmetic beauty. It was good brains, good heart, good, you know, physical look. And our first subject was Antonia Fraser. And we had, I think there were about 6 people we were going to do. So I shot the segment on Antonia, and I really liked it. It was very interesting. It was interesting in working in that medium. And we were waiting for Queen Sirikit of Thailand to come in. She was going to be the second subject. And she was delayed. My arrangement with these people was that if I had to go back to do my work, I would, and then come back again. I left, and when I left, the Queen came into London. And it was too late for me. But the 2 producers, who were always fighting with one another, they shot the segment. And when they finished, they kept fighting with one another. One kept one segment, one kept the other segment. The network just cut them out. But on the plane back, I started to think, maybe this is the time to make a move. And when I got back to the States, I spoke to a friend of mine who knew a writer, French writer. And I said, well, I'd like to talk to him. I did. I talked to him on the telephone.
Jacques Ségur.
Jacques Ségur, yes. And then he came to America. I found out that he had been very popular in the 40s, writing films. I think he said, or they said he wrote Simone Signoret's first film and Jean-Philippe's first film. And it was a dark period of cinema, and my film was a little dark, and I liked it, so we made an arrangement, and I would pay him. He went out to California, and he wrote a script. He wrote The script that I quite liked, it was a larger subject. It included abortion, it included things, and he is the originator of the title. Carol Eastman didn't like the title, but I insisted on the title because I really liked the title. I felt it was applicable to what we were working on because we had eliminated the abortion and things like that. But Jacques was working in California, and at that point, I had become friendly with Faye Dunaway, and she was going out to California, and I asked him to look at her, tell me what he thought about her. And he was very negative about her, you know. He was telling me things like, well, her eyes are too close, and this, you know, just things that had nothing to do with acting. And then when I gave him what I thought were some changes from the first draft and what I thought it needed, he was very upset and didn't think that first-time director should tell a French writer with experience how to rewrite things. And so then I found we couldn't get along anymore, so I just abandoned the project completely, except for the title. And luckily, on another trip to California, I ran into a producer in an elevator who I had met through mutual friends. And he asked me what I was doing. I told him I was looking for a writer, and he had an experience with Carol Eastman on Petulia. And she wrote a draft of that film for them, which they didn't use, but he thought the draft was wonderful. And he sent it to me, and I thought it was wonderful. I laughed a lot, and I just thought she was a brilliant writer, so I met with her. And Faye was out there. She met with her, and I thought Carol would be just so excited to write this thing with Faye Dunaway, because by then Faye was a big star from Bonnie and Clyde. But Carol, you know, she listened and all that, and I kept calling her from New York saying, don't worry, I haven't forgotten about you, because I was waiting for Ismail Merchant to come back from India, because he had said that he was interested in producing the film. But he was in India for film after film, and just was taking too long. So I went out to California with the tapes that I had done of the original model, Anne St. Marie. And I asked Carol if she'd come to see me, and we'd talk about it. And she came to see me, and I said to her, you know, I have these tapes I'd like you to listen to. And she said, well, I don't have too much time because a friend of mine is in the car with a toothache. I said, well, bring her in. I mean, why is she? He said, no, she's shy. And I said, okay, well, listen to what you can. And there were 3.5 hours of tapes. She listened to all 3.5 hours of tapes because she was so fascinated by the tapes. And that's basically the beginning of the progress on the film.
How come the name, how did it impose itself? She was called Lou Andreas, which refers, of course, to Lou Andreas Salome, the famous writer and lover of Rilke and Nietzsche.
Yeah.
And
well, that came from Carol. Carol picked up on that. The title of the film came from the original author, and the Downfall Child was really from a friend of mine who used to have a nightmare where she would get up in the middle of the night, go to the window, open the window, and stand there trying to catch a child that was falling. And I think Jacques used that as a metaphor for Puzzle of the Downfall Child, because the original script that Jacques wrote did include an abortion. And that would mean a child falling, or, you know, and we used it loosely for Puzzle. Carol was not too happy with the title, but I liked it so much that we went with it.
Puzzle is a good title because it's really a fragmented view of a woman by herself. I mean, the film is really a subjective view of the world. It's through her eyes. We never know if she's lying or if she's telling the truth.
Yeah, I don't like to think of her as lying, because I think she's in a state in her mind where she really believes certain things. You know, when she puts on a wedding gown and it's white, she thought of it as black because it was a dark day for her. She didn't want to get married, and she doesn't get married. So the gown, the dress is black. But that's in her mind, and it's not a lie, it's an illusion.
And she wants, you know, when she plays, she's kind of schizophrenic when she asks, is it Mark or in the bar that when she wants him to have another name and she would have another name.
Aaron.
Aaron. She would be picked up.
Yeah, because she doesn't want, she can't give in to sex with people she knows. She can only do it with strangers, and she makes up a story. But that's a whole other story too, because I thought, well, it would really be interesting to have Aaron or Barry Primus, who plays Aaron, just invent the whole story. So we didn't talk about it. We didn't say anything. And he went in and he went on and on and on. It was a lot of rubbish in there, and we went through two cameras full of film. And then when the producer saw it, he said, "Oh, that stuff is terrible. We got to redo it and all that." And I thought for a while, and because it wasn't written to cut it that way, but since the film was doing that anyhow, in the editing, I felt that we had enough to cut it the way it would be an interesting and stay consistent with the rest of the film. And but he was furious with me because I wouldn't reshoot it, the producer. And but then when he saw it, he saw what I was doing, and it was. And actually, we probably cut that very early so that he could see that. I think even before we finished shooting, we might have started to put that together. But there were pieces in there that were really hysterical when he introduces himself and does the name, and then he talks about a yellow truck, and it just so happens that the bed had a cover on it that was yellow. That was accident, you know, it wasn't purposely done.
Of course, the construction of the film is extremely complex, elaborate, and unlike most American films or even European films, it has a complexity. Particularly, I found in the soundtrack. I mean, the soundtrack plays an essential role because it locates where the people are, and you can distinguish between what you see and where they are. The sound of birds.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, you are in the country.
I think Carol was an enormous help to me in her knowledge of cinema. You know, we'd talk for hours. You know, I'd go out to California and we'd have dinner. It would take 6 hours sometimes for dinner. How the actual forming of the style, I'm not quite sure. I don't remember. Of course, her script indicated things like that. But my thinking would then take off on what she was saying, and I would either enlarge upon it or do something in that, because we knew the style, and of course she had the experience of the fact that I also did the taping, and she would pick up things from Anne's tapes, because Anne would in the middle change the subject or go back to something. She in the tapes you could see that Anne's pattern of telling the story was somewhat that way. But I know that Carol really liked the film after she saw it, because I don't know what experiences she had, but when she saw the film and the way it was, she was quite happy with it.
It's also very personal because Aaron, in a way, is going to make his first film. He's a fashion photographer. there is even the name Schatzberg written among the people she would not work with anymore.
That was after a nice argument we had, and she put it down in red, and I left it in there, and I thought it was very amusing. And people who watch see that, others, just pass it by. But for me, it was very symbolic of what was going on.
I suppose, to do a first film, you felt more secure also. I mean, you love the subject, obviously, and you wanted to do it, but also it was about a milieu that you knew, so you had a kind of more confidence, probably, in a first feature to deal with a background which you knew would be authentic.
I think that's essential, but I think any director or any good director who takes on a subject is going to know about the subject. I mean, I see films like what's the name? It was in this year's Academy. Winter's Bone. Well, I know that director went into Appalachia and found her tapestry, and really, I find it remarkable, and I don't think she comes from that, but you have to find out. And I remember, as an anecdote, when I went to Cannes with Needle Park, I saw Keith Richards from the Rolling Stones there, and we knew each other, and he said to me, "Hey man, you into hard stuff?" And I said, "No." He said, "How come you can do a film about that?" I thought for a while, and I said, "Well, I could probably do a film where a woman has a baby, and I can't do that either, So, you do your research and you find out what it is you're trying
Yes, but still, in this film, for instance, the scene, very striking scene when she has to carry on her arm a falcon or some bird of prey. The whole anxieties and the threats, I mean, you almost condense in one session of photography all the pressures and the fears she can experience.
Oh, yeah. I mean...
was it inspired by some photograph that you knew?
Well, a lot of the time... Oh, yeah. Well, first of all, in working for the magazines and then seeing what they actually are interested in putting on their page, I have some dream of some beautiful woman and all that, and they just find a little detail that interests them, and but that's part of that business. They are in a business of trying to tell you what is fashionable, But no, I can't say that it wasn't a great plus to know my subject matter that well and to know what know what I was doing that well. But I didn't really know the drug world that well. I knew people that were in it, but people say that it was very authentic. Sometimes they'd say it was more authentic than some of the documentaries they've seen, because I really feel it's my responsibility to give the audience an honest look at a subject that I'm going to, portray on the screen.
40 years later, what way do you see now how important was your background as a photographer? Though, of course, the early critics in America said that it was a fashion photographer's picture, which was silly, I mean, kind of Pavlovian response. But nevertheless, it must have influenced or at least prepared you to shoot a film.
Well, the whole process of taking a photograph prepares you for doing a film, because you must do your research, you must think of your ideas, you must come up, maybe the ideas are not as big as a film, but you still have to go through that process. But I think the idea of light and composition is very important to me, and I think to most directors, because you usually set up an atmosphere or a mood to begin with. But and it was very important to me, and when I asked Adam Hollander to do the film, I knew his work. I had talked to him, and I knew that by hiring him, he would be able to give me what I wanted, technically and aesthetically, while I could concentrate on the acting, because I didn't feel that confident in the acting at first. I didn't know how I would be able to work with actors. And Adam came to me on different occasions, because the scene you're talking about with the hawk, that's very typical fashion lighting. It's not cinema lighting per se, but it's very fashion lighting, and he wanted to know how I would do that. you know, and I told him how I do it, and he was able to do it. But to take Puzzle and then go to Panic at Needle Park with the same cameraman, you can see the talent he has. I mean, he can, you know, so we had a great rapport.
So did you have general principles on the palette, on the colors of the film, discussing with him?
Well, I think we discussed a lot of Andrew Wyeth for that particular.
The house.
Huh?
The house, the painting with the house.
Yeah, and actually I had given the art people, all the people in the art department, the book I had, and they kept it, you know, throughout the shooting. So that was one thing. But as years went by, and I guess in maybe 10, 15 years ago, I started photographing garbage or things that are thrown away in the street, or people, items that people lose in the street. And I've got a big collection. I think we're going to have an exhibition here this next year, partly with that material. But in 1957, I had gone to a dinner with avant-garde artists of the time, with Robert Rauschenberg and Jasper Johns and John Cage and all that. And it was a very enlightening dinner for me. Everybody brought food, but we talked. And I talked to Rauschenberg quite a while, because I said to him, I said, are you trying to be funny? I mean, you know, and he said, no, I'm just trying to make people aware. But then we went deeper into it, because he used to go in the street and collect garbage. You just pick up whatever he'd see, and you'd see it in his paintings. He'd bring it, and somewhere it would appear. And I must have been very impressed with that, because if I think of all my work, if I think of my photography and my films, I really go between illusion and reality, which Puzzle is very much in evidence that. But even in Panic, I mean, these people have the illusion that they're going to live this great, wonderful life. And then I had a seminar at the Museum of Modern Art after Panic came out, and I was talking, thinking that I had produced or directed a film that would discourage people from taking drugs. And one of the teachers, because we had invited classes and children from the inner city, and one of the teachers got up and said, you may think that you discourage them, but for these children, what you show up there is a step up. And I was really shocked, because the reality is that it is. You know, for them, who live very poor, they don't have fathers in the home, they go out and they steal television sets, and they get drugs, and the illusion is that life is going to be better, but in reality, it's not. So, and Scarecrow, it's the same thing. They're dreaming of something that is, in real life, is not necessarily true. But when I analyze most of my photographs, I find a lot of that. The fish market, these two people dressed in evening clothes among the fishmongers. And all. I'm sure that Rauschenberg and Walker Evans and Miro were very big influences on the way I learned my art.
The photography of the film, the palette, as we spoke about, as a kind of realism, except not one, but there is a particular scene which is extremely stylized and formal. It's the scene in the hospital, which is all white. It's like almost a kind of dreamlike sequence.
Yeah, because that's the way she remembers it. To her, it was not real. It was pleasant. She had her psychiatrist, and they'd have drinks, and Aaron would come, and then, you know, so. And that was not, I'm quite sure that was not written that way. That's the way I saw it. And it was difficult for me too, because it was, I think that was the only scene that I shot in the studio, and I didn't enjoy shooting in the studio. Every time you move a chair, you got to repaint things and all that, and I just didn't like it. It was not that freedom that I would like, or that I do like. So I usually shoot in real locations.
But you mentioned the scene with the bird of prey, and you have the close-up of the mouth, you know, red lips and so on. And I think it's influence of fashion photography in that particular scene.
Definitely.
But I think what is interesting is that you were one of the great. I mean, you did photography of street scenes and portraits and landscapes, but a lot also of fashion photography at the same time as Avedon and Irving Penn. It's interesting to see that how in the 50s, 60s, fashion photographers really were very influential in terms of aesthetics.
Yeah, I think so. But I think fashion photographers are always influential. If you take the 30s, 40s, 50s, up till now, I consider fashion photographers journalists because even though we're photographing women showing clothes, we're telling the women in what situation they should be. In the 80s, they went very much into drugs, and all the women looked like they were high, and and it was done on purpose by fashion photographers. In the 50s, much more elegant. I mean, the women were so elegant. In the 60s, it was the British influence on clothes, on women, and also like Anne was probably one of the last models of that age, because after that they started to be 17, 16, I think they're even 50 now, because those are the people you sell to. But it was still 15-year-olds today. They get high, they smoke, they do whatever they do. So we're really chronicling the period. So in a way, we are journalists, but not the people who cover wars, but we cover life in general. And that particular shot of that is influenced by my working on makeup ads or cosmetics and things like that, which I thought would be appropriate for the film.
I would like to know also that I think you mentioned one day that there was a red desert that struck you with its use of color. What kind of films would you have in mind, or that interested you at the time? Or
no, I don't know if I said that it interests me that way. When I saw Red Desert, I was very impressed with the photography and the work of it, and I was sure that Antonioni had seen the photographs of Saul Leiter, who was, for me, a wonderful photographer, but just, and I may be assuming, because I'm sure there were other photographers that he could have looked at, cinematographers or photographers, but for me, when I saw Red Desert, and being from the still photography side, I looked at Saul Leiter's photographs and saw his use of lenses and color in Red Desert the same way. And then when I read that he would even paint the grass a different color and do things like that, I was very impressed with that. I don't think Saul Leiter would. Saul Leiter has difficulty getting up in the morning.
I would like to also speak about another aspect which is quite striking in the film is the presence of the Far East with the Fu Manchu, with the Shanghai Express by Sternberg, with the Chinese fisherman, even the Chinese model that takes her place. I mean, and even the eyes of Faye Dunaway, who have a kind of Jean Tierney or a kind of
which is amazing now, because I saw on television that many, maybe almost 85–90% of young Chinese or Asian women are having their eyes operated on. And we spend all of our time having makeup to make the eyes look Asian. It's just incredible. But the influence, I think, comes from many different sources. The main one comes from Anne herself, who in the tapes talks about, I think her father spoke Chinese. It was just a reference to that, and it was just out of context and everything, and Carol just picked up on that, and it was very funny to her. So she put in the Chinese man. The Asian woman may be me because I think they're beautiful, you know, and even my first wife, I always felt looked a little Asian. I used to call her China doll, you know, so that probably comes from me. So it comes from a number of different sources. And they all happen to come together in the same thing. But the source of the Chinese comes from Anne herself, who said that she understood Chinese, or I don't remember what it was, but I think maybe her father spoke Chinese, but there was something there that would seem so out of context.
But the use of the clip of Shanghai Express.
Yeah, that comes from Carol, because she was really a student of cinema. Her father used to take her to see silent films and all films. She had much bigger experience in cinema than I did. I had experience in movies, because I went to the movies 3 times a week, Friday night, Saturday, and Sunday. But I was never a cineast at that time. You know, I never knew about anything but Mickey Rooney and Judy Garland and the films that were playing around at that time.
There is this marvelous scene which is also about directing, about how to direct an actor, make him do things that he doesn't feel like doing, is when she takes aside this young man who loves Marlene Dietrich, and she takes him aside, and so to have a scene when they kiss each other to make it convincing, and she has to really to make him interpret something which you must have had to do with a lot of actors, you know, somehow.
Well, yeah, you do that, but the character in that was based on a character, and he was homosexual, and he was my favorite male model. And I would give him an assignment to do, and he was remarkable. I mean, he was, as a matter of fact, somebody was writing a book about him, and she would keep questioning me to find out why I thought he would. And you know, you try to explain somebody's talent, it's very difficult. But his name was Bob Smith, and anything I found, you know, and I always found relationships, and you know, and now I'm selling a lot of photographs for licensing a lot of photographs, and they're all romantic photographs, and it's always he and Anne, and they had such a great rapport because. And I didn't have to spend that much time explaining things because they were talented. They knew how to get this. And Bob was, you know, probably, well, he was my favorite male model, and just the relationship between them. But that happens on the screen, and it doesn't happen on the screen. You know, there are people that don't even like each other and work together, and you think they're the best of friends. And from what I've heard in Casablanca, which is one of the great love stories, Ingrid Bergman and Humphrey Bogart hardly spoke to one another, you know, but I think that's the greatest love affair that ever happened.
But the fact that you had, that you were very close, you lived with Faye Dunaway for almost 2 years, must have definitely, the personality or the actress must have things in her which also enrich the performance.
Yeah, but I don't think anybody really ever does a film that they don't include their own experience, and certainly actors do that, you know. And yes, I knew a lot of Faye, and Faye also got to know the model, you know, because the model was still living at that time. So Faye could see that the speech patterns in the tapes and the malaprops that she used to use in her speaking were accurate, and Faye, as an actress, you know, could pick up on that very easily. And yes, I would say that there's probably a lot of Faye in the character, but I don't think any actor really is totally original. They always have to bring themselves into the character.
What about the way you remember shooting this first film? Did you have a lot of rehearsal, or how did you work with actors? Did you have rehearsal or a reading of the text or rehearsal in the real sets?
Yeah, the way I usually work, I try to have 2 weeks of just sitting and reading. And while you read, you get ideas because the actors are starting to contribute at that point. With Puzzle, I had the advantage of knowing Faye much longer, and she would talk to me about acting somewhat, so I would get a little bit of knowledge because I don't know what they go through and what their training is. Sometimes I don't think I should because that's up to them. They're the talent that's gonna, it's good to talk about the character, what we're trying to get at before. Then when they're doing it, because I don't know how they prepare, because that's their job. But when I'm standing behind the camera, I see that they've prepared, and I see that they're now doing what it is that their talent allows them to do. But I do that 2 weeks of reading, and we very rarely go through a finished scene to try to say, but we do get ideas about the character and what might happen, or I might say to somebody, I remember saying to Gene Hackman in Scarecrow, I told him a story about a homeless person coming in, because I used to work very late at night, and I'd go in for coffee at places that stayed open at night, and this homeless person comes in, he goes up to the counter, and he starts pulling the napkins out of the dispenser, and he starts cleaning the counter and taking the salt and pepper shakers and everything. And it was very odd for me to see this homeless person doing that. And I just told the story to Gene. I didn't tell him to use it, I didn't tell him where to use it or anything, but when he comes into the cafe, so he must have felt in his development of his character. And even in that bag that he carries, or that case that he carries, there's a roll of toilet paper. We never see it, we never know, but that's part of his existence. So you give that to him, because when they're just about to cross over that bridge, he obviously was in the bushes doing something, but he's that fastidious person. Even with his clothes, we don't say they're dirty or anything, they're worn and they're old. But that's his character, and his dream is to have a car wash, and that's something very clean. So you put all these things in for actors, and they pick up on it. And if you don't like it, you say, well, let's try something else, or let's do it another way. But then also, the actual run-through of the scene is done on set before, so the cameraman can see, and he can do the lighting that we've discussed. And pretty much that's what I do, because I like to leave it as loose as I can. And I know that actors, especially actors like Gene or Al, they like that freedom of, and they like to be surprised at things. And I do surprise them with things that they don't know is going to happen, because they are actors, so they will react to it.
There's this marvelous scene at the end of the film, which is this long traveling on the dunes, and this kind of affirmative scene after so much depression and so much angst, when he tells her that they had a relationship. I think it's very moving. And how did you see this idea of this long walk in one shot?
Economics. I spoke to Adam about this, and I don't like to say to a friend and a collaborator, you got to do this, and sometimes you do have to say that. So I said to Adam, I said, now you tell me, we've got this shot that we have to do. It's from there to there, and we've got to get all this information. How would you set it up? How would you shoot it? I knew how he was going to set it up. I knew he was going to say, well, we take dolly tracks, we put it here, and we move the camera and all that, because he's from a very classic education in cinema. And I said, now try to think, we don't have money for dolly tracks. We don't have money, we don't have time to do all that. What's the next solution? And he said, no, but I really like it that way. And I said, well, what if we took a very long lens, because we have got long lenses here, and we just slowly went with them, Well, and I convinced him that this is the way we're going to do it, And that comes as part of my training. I know about the equipment. You know, if I didn't know about it, maybe I would have said, okay, let's do it that way. But we didn't have money. You know, it was a low-budget film, and but it worked. It worked very well. You know, and it's maybe it's not what you're supposed to do, but so what? You know.
Now, maybe we can talk also about the, what happened to the film when it was shown first at the San Francisco Film Festival, because I know that the American press had, well, it's not only American, it's human nature, has prejudices, and always the judgment is made beforehand that you were a fashion photographer, then you made a film which took place in the fashion world, therefore you had made a fashion photographer's film, and 30 years later, Andrew Sarris, one of the leaders of the New York critics, apologized and said, how could we miss these films, you know, Scarecrow and before that, Puzzle?
I didn't hear the apology, but I knew that he wasn't very favorable to the film, and many people weren't. But I went to a brunch 30 years later, and Andrew heard my name, and we hadn't met before, and he was, oh, Jerry Schatzberg, Puzzle, a Downfall Child, you know, and I knew that you and Pierre and people, I've been talking to him for years about things like that, but now they had, but you know, there's something about maybe American critics that at the time when something is a little different and they don't like where they come from, they just won't accept it, but it takes a generation later and a generation later to discover it. And I mean, I talk to young critics now who, you know, adore the film. It's got a big cult following in America. But even in San Francisco, Pierre Ciment was in San Francisco. He tells the story that he was looking through the schedule and he saw this film and he says, oh, I don't want to see a film by a bullshit fashion photographer. And then there was nothing to do that day. He says, well, I'll see 5 minutes of it. And he went and he stayed 10 minutes, and he stayed and saw the whole film. Right after that, he called Jennings Lang at Universal and said, I want to represent that film in Europe. And then he called you and told you saw it, and then you started twisting arms and telling everybody that they got to see this film.
But you rescued the film from, you know, from this screening in San Francisco.
Yeah. I mean, if that didn't happen, we wouldn't be sitting here. Maybe, you know, maybe I'd just be a photographer still doing my thing.
Because the film with Faye Dunaway, who had just done Arrangement and Bonnie and Clyde, and the film opened only very peripherally. I mean, it didn't have a big opening.
It opened in one cinema on the east side.
It's amazing.
I think for a week or 2 weeks. You know, yeah. But they make judgments. Well, I'll tell you, Warner Brothers never was really behind Scarecrow, and it won the Golden Palm. They were trying to sell 6 other films because it was their 75th anniversary or something. And I think they were quite sure that Oh Lucky Man or Day for Night would take the prize at Cannes. And even the American talk show people who were covering the thing didn't have a foot of footage on Scarecrow because the studio just didn't back it. And I don't know why. You know, I do interviews. I did an interview yesterday, and they said, you know, your first 3 films were blah blah blah, blah and you know, they're so well regarded now. Did it upset you and all that? It didn't. It didn't. You know, I was just happy to be making films.
Maybe if you had been a European director doing Puzzle, your countrymen would have liked it more.
Or they try to use the 70s as the new American cinema. Well, I don't think anybody making films then thought of it as anything but we're making films. I mean, Scorsese and Coppola and Spielberg and Lucas, they all went to school. and they came out and made good films. Now, if they didn't go to school, they would have still made good films because they were making films when they were 8 years old. I had another career before, so maybe because I was doing something else, they didn't pay that much attention. Because already had celebrity in photography. So I wasn't the new kid on the block, so to speak. But when the puzzle came out, it was fashion photographer, and the subject matter was. But it sort of was confusing to me when Panic came out, and they would still preface it by fashion photographer Jerry Schatzberg did Panic, and and what has that got to do with this world, And it took them a while to drop the fashion photographer thing, or ex-fashion photographer.
But the film also relates to all your films in the sense that you pay attention to people who are hurt by life. I mean, this is something that you go through from Dandy, the All-American Girl, it goes to Street Smart, to Reunion, of course, Puzzle, Panic, Scarecrow. I mean, these people are somehow suffering, but you don't like melodrama. I mean, you don't make melodramatic films, but you make emotional films about people, not only downtrodden, but people who are really somehow hurt by the world and by life in general.
Yeah, but this is not conscious with me, and it has to do with maybe my upbringing, not necessarily my parents, but where I grew up in the Bronx, or because when I was in primary school, my best friend was very poor. But it was me that wanted to take care of him. And I remember once some big bully was taking advantage of him, and I wasn't a fighter, but I went in there to fight for my friend physically. But I didn't like what they fed him in school. So he was so poor that he had to get free food at lunch in school, and I didn't like what he got. And I lived a block away from school, so I'd take him home with me all the time. And I made sure that for his birthday and Christmas time, my father bought him a present, So it's something in me, instinctively. And I don't know whether it comes from my father, my mother, or just the people I hung out with. But it's not something I know. But when I think of a story, those are the stories I think of. But maybe some of the films that haven't been made are not quite that. Because I wanted to do Nelson Algren and Simone de Beauvoir, which is not necessarily the marginal people, but it was a story that appealed to me, but I never got it on.
But you were also a child of the Depression. I mean, you were 4 or 5, at the top of the Depression, so it must have influence also.
That's possible, and also my father was a gambler, so he was always losing his money, and we'd have to go between having money and not having money, But as I say, it's instinctive with me. It's not something that I set out to do, and also when I got, I knew a lot of people that were into drugs, so the subject matter wasn't far from me because I knew a lot of musicians and people that died, from it. But the subject matter didn't appeal to me when I first read it because I was very upset that the lab had scratched the last 6 minutes of my negative of Puzzle, which was the film I wanted to do. I think I only thought I was going to do one film. So that was really very much on my mind. But when they presented me this, I read it very quickly, and it wasn't until I found out that Al was interested, because I had seen him on the stage.
Al Pacino.
Al Pacino. I saw him 4 or 5 years earlier when I was still not making films. And I said, if ever I made a film, that's the guy I'd like to work with. And now I had just turned down a film that he was interested in, so I went back to it. I revisited it, and I went back to the producers, and so I was lucky. They could have gone elsewhere, right away. But then when I reread it, that's when I realized that it's really something that could be wonderful, because I'm picturing the character and picturing what was going on with these people. And then when Scarecrow was presented, the same thing, the same kind of people that I like to champion or say something about.
Thank you.